Hello and welcome to the Seeking Health podcast. I am Josiah.
And I'm in Jisca.
We were missionaries for 7 years until we stepped back in 2019 to seek health and re-examine our beliefs. Right now, I'm a Christian, but not an evangelical.
And I'm an agnostic. And we are deconstructing and reconstructing
Together. Listen to some of our key episodes, such as Deconstructing Together, Domestic Abuse, I Am a Survivor,
The Cult of ATI Part 1 and 2, and Dehumanized by Purity Culture.
Join us on our journey as we seek health together. So something that we've had a lot of questions about on our Instagram and on our
private messages
is people asking us in the deconstruction community. What you're saying is great and our progress is great and we've been finding so much health, but how do we talk to our kids? And we have 5 kids, so it's logical for people to come to us and assume that we have answers. But the truth is we don't have a lot of answers. We're pretty new to this.
It's only been like 16 months since we left, and COVID has made it that we could kind of avoid the question of why we're not in church.
And as you can see from our introduction, I'm a Christian, she's not. So it might be a little bit more complex than couples that deconstruct together. But we have a few things that we have a little bit of wisdom, but we're really students on this subject. And so we've brought on an expert on this. Rachel, we've really appreciated your content, especially on TikTok. And you have Post-Mormon parenting on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. And so we'd love to ask you, how do you help your kids to come with you on the journey of deconstruction or re-examining their faith, or whatever you want to call it,
post-church,
making their life their own. So first of all, I'm just curious, would you like to just share a little bit about yourself and your story and how you came to this place of being post-church, in your case, post-Mormon church?
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me. I am Rachel of Post-Mormon Parenting, and it's so nice meeting the both of you, and you are too kind. I wouldn't say I'm an expert by any means, except for my own parenting journey. That's about all that I'm an expert in, and I've just made it my mission to devour as many books as I can and try to find as many resources as I can and try to ask all the questions and try to hopefully not screw up my kids, right? Aren't we all?
Yep.
Trying to give them a little bit less trauma than maybe what we grew up with. And hopefully they'll have a little less to deconstruct than we did. So, so I was born and raised in the Mormon Church, also known as Latter-day Saints, or as the full name of the church is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And a couple of years ago, the leader of the church said, hey, we're not going to use the word Mormon anymore. We're just going to tell all of our friends we are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which is just kind of nonsense. Like, I'm just going to say Mormon. Like, we all grew up Mormon. Yeah, we were part of the I Am a Mormon campaign for years and years. And so we're just going to stick with Mormon. So all of my friends who are still in the church might have a hard time with that because the prophet said. Anyways, so my name is Post-Mormon Parenting, and so I grew up on the East Coast, so a little bit different of a culture from some of my friends who grew up in Mormon Central in Utah, Idaho, Arizona, a little bit of California. I had a lot more like feminist young women leaders. And my mom was a little bit feminist as well in her own ways. And so I had just like a little bit different of a perspective. And then I moved out here toward Mormon Central, and I saw so many issues that a lot of my female friends were struggling with: body image, things left over from purity culture that they had instilled in them even more strongly than I had gotten. Intimacy issues within their marriage, which I listened to a recent episode that you guys did, and it was amazing. It was like just so eye-opening, and things like that. But let's see. Then when I was about 20 years old, I got married. I met my husband at the Lord's University at Brigham Young University in Utah. And we have 3 children. We stopped believing around 2 years ago. So I think I got a little bit of a head start on you guys.
Yep.
And my kids are quite little. My oldest was 6 when we stopped attending. And so that kind of makes it a lot easier on me. I don't have a 13-year-old or 14 or 15-year-old, kids who really grew up in it and were kind of molded by it and have found their community at church.
Yeah.
So I'm lucky in that way because my kids were like, great, we hated going to church anyways. It was so boring. Thank goodness we get to stay home. And they've heard us talk out loud as we're deconstructing the last couple of years. So all of my kids have not a great view maybe of the church anymore, which that gives itself another challenge for me and for my family because a lot of their friends are still members of the church. So I have to have lots of conversations with them about this is how we can be respectful of their beliefs, even though, yeah, you've heard all the things that we've said about it and the harm that the church does, but we still need to be respectful and maybe not go around evangelizing about how God is not real and,
opposite evangelism.
Yeah. So anyway, so that's, I don't know, that's a little bit about me. And I thought we'd start off today by talking a little bit about our views about parenting when we're in that very traditional, conservative, fundamentalist kind of religious mindset, and how we can think of alternatives. Do you guys have any questions or anything you want to cover before we go into that?
Well, I just wanted to mention, it might be strange to some of our listeners to talk about Mormonism in the same breath as evangelicalism.
Oh,
but I just wanted to mention, we don't have to spend a lot of time on this, but it does seem as though there's a lot of similarities there. Well, do you want to talk about, as a Mormon, what are some of the similarities that you've noticed?
Sure. So maybe I'll give a little bit, and then Jisca, you can give your 2 cents as well. I don't know that there are a whole lot of differences. I know that in Mormonism, we believe in Jesus Christ as Savior and Redeemer, that we are all fallen, we have sins, and no unclean thing can dwell with God. So we need somebody to make an atonement for us. And then we accept his sacrifice for us. And then we can, live with God again. And that's basically the gist of the religion. I think in Mormonism, we have a lot of performative acts as well. And maybe that might be a little bit of difference between Mormonism and evangelicals, where we have lots of rituals that we have to do also in order to be saved or to go to like the highest level of heaven, best heaven. So, you have to be baptized, you have to, if you're male, you have to get the priesthood, and you have to be married in the temple. You have to be sealed for forever with your spouse. Those are the main ones. And I don't think there's a lot of that in evangelicalism. I know in Mormonism, a lot of times we're accused of a little bit like the Pharisees, like we keep the rules in order to qualify ourselves for heaven. And it is a little bit of that. Yeah, you have to keep the rules. You have to make sure you're worthy in order to receive Jesus's gift in order to get to heaven. So it's a little bit of a mixed bag there, I think. Yeah. But as far as like modesty culture, modesty is huge. Once you get married in the temple, you have to wear certain undergarments that you probably have heard of. If your listeners haven't heard of this, it's basically like a t-shirt underneath your regular clothes, and your underwear that you wear is like shorts length and out, goes all the way down to your knees. And so you have to wear these underneath your regular clothes, and it kind of forces you to wear very modest clothing because that's huge. So modesty culture, you don't want to tempt the boys around you and make them think lustful thoughts in their hearts. The other is purity culture, right? So you save yourself for marriage. Virginity is huge. Your value and your worthiness before God is based in huge part on your virginal status for men and women, but especially for women, really. So I think those are most of the things that I've noticed. And Jisca, what have you noticed as similarities and differences between the two?
I think you've highlighted it really well.
Yeah.
That's the same thing I see as well. You do have those extra things that you do in a temple. We don't have that as much as obvious.
They're not explicit,
but it's there. Like we'll say we're saved by grace, not by works, but you better be modest. You better wait for marriage. You better not drink in certain circles. You better not, in certain circles, you better wear a head covering. And, it depends which branch of evangelicalism, but it's there. Like you are baptized, you take communion. Some places have the foot washing. Some like it these unspoken rules or not unspoken, but not as laid out and outright as in the Mormon church, but it's still there. Just not as acknowledged. But like almost like toxic positivity as well.
Oh, yeah.
So as I stepped away from the church last year, I joined various deconstruction groups on Facebook, and then like got connected on Instagram with some people. And I really connected a lot with ex-Mormons. And I still talk with a bunch of them. Like it was really fascinating to me how quickly we connected and understood each other. And to me, that spoke a lot to, it might be wrapped differently, but underneath is the same core things. So as I was I've really been wanting to do a podcast on parenting, but I know I'm still the student here. I'm still learning so much. And I came across yours and I was like, I love what you share. And it doesn't matter that your background is Mormonism and ours is evangelicalism, because the struggle of leaving it is the same, and the struggle of relearning to parent is extremely similar.
Yes. And, I'm glad you brought that up. Since I've been on TikTok, I've noticed so many similarities between the videos that I produce and other content creators produce, between ex-Mormons, ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, ex-Seventh-day Adventists, ex-evangelicals, ex-Muslims as well. I think all of us coming from these very conservative, very fundamentalist and orthodox practices have so much in common. Yeah. And so we're all deconstructing kind of the same things.
Yeah.
And like even just this, like from a historical point, all these religions, except for Mormonism that you mentioned, came to birth within America in the last 150 years. Evangelicalism came to birth, and Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons, and it all grew up together. That's around so charismatic leaders, and probably even the types of Islam that would be in America would have grown up, in a certain way. And so the purity culture and the way that we idolize the priesthood and prop up male leadership and all these things, it is very, very similar because it all grew up together. And yeah, sure, we like to say, oh, those are, that's a cult or whatever, but it's like, it's our cousin, we all grew up together. So anyways, all that to say,
true. Yeah, good point.
We're really excited to hear what you have to say about parenting.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, so let's start out with this lens that we grew up with in parenting, right? And I say we, talking about all the groups that we just discussed, we all have this very similar kind of view, and maybe the flavors are a little bit nuanced, a little bit different, but it kind of comes down to this core perspective, and that is that children do well and they behave well when they want to behave well. And this means that if our kids are misbehaving, say they're not sitting quietly in church, or they're not getting ready for school and time is running out, or they're not sharing with their sibling, et cetera, it's because they would prefer to do those other things instead of the right thing, right? And if we believe that, then we also believe that our job as parents is to make them want to do the right thing. And so we do this through a system of rewards and punishments. We try to make it desirable to do the right thing and undesirable to do the wrong thing, right? We use sticker charts, lollipops. We say, if you reach these goals, you get a trip with mom or dad to the ice cream store. And we give them punishments when they have bad or undesirable behavior. We isolate them. We give them timeouts. We ground them. We take away their phones. We try to coerce them and force them into having this good behavior, at least wanting to have this good behavior. And we get this kind of modeling through our interpretation of, I would say, the Bible and these ancient texts, right? Because God is this ultimate parent, the ultimate authority figure who does the same with us, right? He rewards good behavior and he punishes bad behavior. And so like if I pay a full 10% tithing, then God will open the windows of heaven and pour out so many blessings that there will not be room enough to receive it. Or if I look upon another person in lust, I've already committed adultery in my own heart and must be punished for that by going through a harrowing repentance process and groveling for forgiveness. If I dress immodestly, I'll be punished, by God allowing predators to harass and or assault me. If I have premarital sex, God will kill me by giving me an STI or letting me get pregnant, or he would make it difficult for me to get pregnant later on in life when I do want to get pregnant, because of this thing that I did in my past. At the very least, he will see me as less valuable than my peers and withhold blessings from me. So harsh punishments for bad behavior, great rewards for good behavior. We misbehave because we don't want to do the right thing. We want to do the easier or the more tempting or the wrong thing. And if we try to be curious about these behaviors, why did my kid do that? Why did he want to do the bad thing? The right thing is easier, and it means no yelling and timeouts and things. And the answers that we come to is because, my kid was either acted upon by the Holy Ghost and God to do the right thing, or my kid was acted upon by the devil to do the wrong thing. He was tempted and gave into that temptation. So this kind of mindset has been so drilled into us. I mean, at least for me since birth, right? That it's difficult to even conceptualize the possibility of an alternative. So the alternative is this: children do well and behave well when they can. And this means that if kids are misbehaving, they're not sitting quietly in church, or they're not getting ready for school on time, or they're not sharing with their siblings, it's not because they're choosing to give you a hard time, but it's because they are having a hard time, because they know what is the right thing to do and they want to, but they lack the skills necessary to be able to do what you're expecting of them. So when we have this kind of perspective, we realize that a system of rewards and punishments isn't effective. It's not going to be helpful to help our kids do what they need to do. If my kid has never been taught how to tie his or her shoes, then no amount of sticker charts is going to make them tie their shoes. All it's going to do is make them feel like this is so unfair and so unjust, and you're not seeing me, you're not hearing me, and now I'm going to have this big tantrum and outburst, right? If my kid is lacking in time management skills, or say maybe they're having a hard time transitioning from one activity to another, they're having a hard time transitioning that mindset, going from, say, outdoor playing into inside, now it's time to be quiet and sit good and eat your dinner. That's a skill that maybe they haven't built up very well yet. Maybe they need some help with that. And again, so just punishing them for not doing what you're expecting of them is not going to be helpful when they're lacking in that skill. Maybe my teenager is having premarital sex. Under my Old Testament informed perspective, they're going to be doing that because the devil is working on them and tempting them. And, the natural man is an enemy to God and our carnal nature, and they're choosing wickedness over righteousness and need to be punished to curb that behavior. What if they're doing it because they're curious about sex and their bodies, and they don't know any other way to satisfy that curiosity? Or maybe my teen is filled with that feeling of desire for self-autonomy, and they have so many restrictions placed on them in their life that this is the only outlet that they can think of to effectively feel that feeling of autonomy and freedom. And I know that might seem trivial, but let's remember that old saying, give me liberty or give me death, right? This is huge. Just that feeling of I need to be autonomous. I need to have freedom in my life. So what if that's the driving force for them, having premarital sex? Or tons and tons of other reasons, right? Again, surrounding them, taking away their phones, thinking of some kinds of sending them away somewhere, none of that is going to address their underlying issues and the reasons behind the behavior. And so something that I've come to realize is that all behavior is communication. Whatever our kids do, their behaviors are symptoms of what's really going on inside. And they give us clues about what's happening inside. And so if we have that kind of perspective, right, then we can identify the reason or reasons, there's usually more than one, behind their behavior. And then we can help our kids by teaching them the tools and skills that they need in order to get their needs met in more healthy ways. And we can teach them, these are the healthy ways of achieving self-autonomy and freedom, right? And these are healthy ways about answering your questions about sex. I know you're curious, like all humans are. That's a very human thing. Maybe my kid is really lacking the skill of empathy. Maybe they're hitting and biting and kicking and being mean to their sibling because they haven't really developed that skill of being able to put themselves in somebody else's shoes. So when I realize, okay, maybe that's the problem here, that's the real problem here, I don't have to just keep punishing the behavior over and over and expecting things to change. It's not going to happen, right? Instead, I can sit down with them and teach them empathy. We can have a conversation. I can walk them through scenarios like how do you think you would feel if someone you admired completely ignored you and acted like you weren't there? Maybe do some role playing with them, pretend I'm so-and-so and you're so-and-so. What would you say? We can read books and watch movies about empathy and things like that. So again, just like more ideas on how to give them the skills that they need, because children will do well and behave well when they have the skills necessary to help them do that. And a lot of what I've learned comes from lots of different sources throughout the last couple of years that I've been reading. But most recently, I picked up a book by Ross Greene called The Explosive Child. And he talks about these concepts really in depth. So if anyone wants to read a little bit more, have that maybe fleshed out for them, I highly recommend his book. I just picked it up the other day. I'm a little more than like a quarter of the way through it. So, but it's been really helpful so far already. So definitely recommend that. I
was thinking with what you were saying, like it's them learning those skills, but it's also development. Like some certain ages don't get it yet because their brain hasn't developed to that level. So how can you, like something that my family ended up getting into is blanket training. So a child would sit on the blanket and never get off the blanket until the parent allowed them, so that in church they could sit on the blanket, and even if the toy rolled off the blanket, they could not get the toy. And I'm like, that is at an age, young toddler, that does not understand that. So the only reason they are able to do it is because of harsh punishment, basically abuse. They're so terrified
because of trauma.
They're so terrified of the spankings they're going to get and how they're going to get hit that they will obey, but their brain does not understand what's going on.
Absolutely. When my husband and I first got married, some evangelical friends of the family gave us a book, and it talked about blanket training.
Yeah.
And it just makes my skin crawl just remembering what we were reading about that. It's just absolutely terrifying, and a very good recipe for how to traumatize your children and make them have a very, very hard time throughout their life, starting that's such early foundational age.
I saw it practiced in my family, and it just broke my heart.
that is very heartbreaking.
The other thing I heard you say, which I think is very appropriate, is these religions tend to focus us on sin versus righteousness. And there's this black and white dichotomy. And I think it might be a little different in Mormonism, but we were raised with original sin that, we're all sinners, that our default setting is sin. Our default setting is wicked. Our best works are like filthy rags. So, if I remember the first time that my child misbehaved as a 2-year-old, I remember thinking to myself, here's the sinner coming out. When really, a 2-year-old, he's just like, he doesn't even understand no yet. He's just, throwing things because he's never thrown something before.
Yeah.
Everything is new and exciting, and this is something to be celebrated. Yes, you do have to, baby proof your house and put boundaries around, but there's a limit to how much you can really teach a 2-year-old to obey. We just got rid of our fish tank because our 2-year-old dumped fish food in it for the second time. And it was just like, we just can't, but a younger version of me probably would have gone to discipline and thinking like, here's the wicked sinner that's not listening to his father. And how does this reflect on me and whatever.
Let's practice training him.
Yeah. Let's put the fish food there. And then when he touches it, then there'll be this horrible consequence is kind of the traditional, quote unquote, traditional old school, which I don't like that term because it makes it sound like it's old, like cheese is old. It gets better when it's old. Like old school is bad in this case. But this, children are not black and white, good and bad. Often it's just curiosity, or it's just their natural development as they progress through life.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. And you can see how that would have such a harmful effect on our kids. Now, I'm going to say, give yourself some grace, right? You don't have to live your whole life living in regret of treating your children like that. I know all parents in our positions probably did about the same things. I know I did. I talked about this in one of my TikToks about how harmful it was for my oldest kid, because I did raise him with this kind of like, you need to obey me. You need to learn to be exactly obedient. And this is the number one highest priority, which is
Don't
just
ask
so
why, just do.
Yeah, which really goes against our human nature. Again, that give me liberty or give me death. Like I would rather die than be told everything I need to do. Why would my child be any different?
Yeah.
You're just a younger version of me. Yeah. So we were all there. We all messed up our first kids. Thankfully, there's therapy that we know we can send them to later in life when they hit their mid-30s and they start having their life crises, and all these things that they kept suppressed all these years start bubbling to the surface.
I've told Josiah several times, like, I think their high school graduation gift should be like therapy.
Yes. Yes, all of our oldest children will be attending therapy for sure. Hopefully we'll do better with our younger ones. Am I right? Yeah. So let's talk about then morality, because now that we're out of this mindset of everything you do is either a sin or it's righteousness, and there's this black and white dichotomy. What we fear now is swinging the pendulum way to the other side and saying, well, now nothing matters. There's no right or wrong. Do whatever you want. Live a very hedonistic lifestyle. Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. Right? We don't exactly want to swing the pendulum to the other way. And if you have already, like, again, give yourself some grace. We're all in this learning experience together. But here's maybe a different way of thinking about our new models of morality. So under our old models, we had this idea that there's this, God is sitting on his throne, doling out these particular rules. No matter what the rules are, these are our moral guidelines. If God says go to this city and walk around and beat your trumpets and the walls will fall and you get to take everybody as prisoners or kill them, or whatever, it's yours, right? Genocide. Well, that's morally good, right? Because it came from God. And so we're kind of used to this idea of like, we get to be told by this higher authority figure what is right and what is wrong. We don't really need to figure it out ourselves. Whatever he says, done, we do it. Now we got to kind of figure things out for ourselves. And that's, I think, a lot harder to do. And so something that's helped guide me as I think about, well, what is morally grounded? What is a good source of ethics for my kids? And it all comes down to, for me, safety. Safety in physical aspect as well as an emotional and mental aspect. So is my kid being safe around his siblings, right? Is he playing safely around them? Is he being mindful of their physical safety? Is he hurting them physically? Or is he being mindful about, and is he being mindful about their emotional and mental safety? Is he making sure that they understand that he cares about their feelings too, and he's not harming their feelings He's not making anybody feel neglected, just like he would not want to feel neglected. He's not making anyone feel, let's say, jealous, just like he wouldn't want anyone to try to make him feel jealous, things like that, And I think that's, I try to keep it simple so that my kids can remember also. And I think that's kind of been a good rule of thumb for me. As you guys have been going through this for your last year, what have you guys kind of been pondering about as far as like morality goes in that sense? Now I'm putting you guys on the spot.
We're just like, what? We're at a loss for words for one.
And that's okay. And that's okay. It's so good to know that like, it's okay to not know the answer, right? We're coming out of this whole system.
I mean, for me, like
we have all the answers that we need.
Yeah. For me, it's really been learning to live in the gray. Like I use that term a lot or I think about that term a lot. Like life is not black and white anymore. And I love that we get to live in the gray, like that we don't have to have all the answers and we don't have to know it all. And what we teach our kids doesn't come down to like, if you love Jesus or because you're a sinner. It's just, I just want them to be good people, I just want them to be good contributors to society and to live in this world, be of this world, not to feel like they're foreigners and they have to figure out how to live in this world the way we are now because we're out of the bubble. So I just want them good people, good people to themselves, but to others. I guess that's kind of been my go-to this year.
I think as we were talking before this, I realized there's some things we have done for years already that actually have been pretty good. Like we haven't, like I was into apologetics. I'm more educated. And so in some ways I was seeing through some of the evangelicalism. I still had to kind of teach it and put on a front, but there, in some ways I didn't completely believe the black and whiteness of that other people might have thought. And so I did try and pass that on to our older kids, like exposing them to, like, it was kind of a big deal. I got them to read Harry Potter, just like, here's a bunch of different ideas, and they're going to public school this year. And I do really encourage them to think critically. I don't tell them this is, how old the earth is. This is this belief, it's like, well, here's different perspectives. And I don't even necessarily follow up on it. Like, it's just, you hear comments now and then, like, well, this is what I think, and they're making up their own mind. So that's something that I don't have a lot of regrets about. I feel good about that. And something that we've done early on, and it kind of came naturally, is even with our really little kids, I remember yelling at one of our kids across the playground, "Hey, that's her body, leave her alone." And that's something we've been really strong on. Like, your sister has her own body and her body is her space, and you don't have a right to violate that. And that comes in very early because kids feel as though they have a right to do anything they want. And that is something, talking about ethics, where no, your rights end where their body begins. You don't have a right to do something to their body that they don't want you to do to their body, which obviously, bubble. Yeah. And we did have one kid that was very sensory. And so then we had this bubble concept.
Bubble concepts, like, don't touch the personal bubble. Don't go into the personal bubble. So they're like, I'm going to kiss the bubble. But I don't know, like,
so cute.
It made him so mad. Don't kiss my bubble.
But I think doing something like that. They're smelling me. They're smelling my bubble.
It's awesome. Yeah, we've always been very intuitive parenting, even though we were definitely very steeped in evangelicalism. I mean, we were missionaries. We were really all in. But our intuition in terms of parenting and how each child is different and stuff, it's always been pretty strong. It's kind of neat looking back that we didn't soak up all the religious parenting books. We didn't really read them.
Good for you. Yay.
But I have to say this little story. We had to travel to a lot of churches and people's homes when we were missionaries. And so we stayed in this one home and for one night, and then before we knew it, when we were back home, we got a parenting book in the mail from this family.
Oh, what a nice kid. I think you're terrible parents. You need this book.
I was like, my kids, they were pretty decently behaved when we were there. So yeah, I did not read the book.
They sent us James Dobson, Dare to Discipline.
Oh no! Oh no! Oh.
It's just like, it's one of those funniest memories ever.
Wow. Well, glad you didn't feel like you needed to read it. That's
yeah, I think in parenting, it's always good to just sort of learn to listen to your gut, and each kid needs different things, and that's okay.
Yeah. Well, I love how you brought up that point about developmentally appropriate. What is developmentally appropriate and how do we know? And that's going to be tricky without educating ourselves on what is developmentally appropriate. And I don't think there's a whole lot of evidence-based research out there based on like the little bit that I've found as I've been searching. And so that is going to be something that I'm going to be continually looking for.
Yeah.
So hopefully, you know, as I keep doing this process over the next few years, I'll be able to put out more and more about developmentally appropriate things. But like you said, like kids are very egocentric. They're born very egocentric. When they're newborns, they cannot possibly conceive of anybody having feelings outside of themselves. It's just impossible for them.
That's not evil.
Right. It's not evil. It's a skill that develops very slowly and very gradually over a long time. And we can help out with that process by teaching them things like, this is her bubble. Her body is not yours. And reinforcing that over and over and talking about things like consent, checking in with them. When my kids are roughhousing, I remind them to pause every now and then and check in with them. Just because someone is laughing doesn't mean they're enjoying it. You know, you can be tickled and until your face turns blue and you're laughing, but you're really not enjoying it. So I remind them how that feels for them, how to have empathy and consent in that way. But yeah, it's just, these skills are things that take so long and are so gradual. And it's hard to not get very impatient with them because I already know how to do that. Why can't you figure this out? You know, we're coming from perspective. But yeah, we can just be patient with them and work through them through their developmentally appropriate stages like that. Absolutely. Yeah. Do you guys have any other questions, things that maybe you were thinking of or things that you've gotten from your listeners about specific things about parenting? I
definitely had a question. And I know your kids might be a little bit young for that, but I also know that on sexuality, like with teens, it starts younger than teens. I mean, that is definitely one thing I was never ever taught about consent. That was never ever taught. So I definitely, one thing I've been learning is how you teach consent from a young age. And it's not sexual, like it is just consent on how you treat others. But that will lead to, as you develop and your body changes, it leads into sexuality. And just consent is just really important. So that is definitely something that I want to change with my kids because I was not taught consent and that is not right at all. So I know your kids are a little bit young, but you have been doing a lot more reading than I have. And one thing that's overwhelming to me is as my kids get to teenage years, for me, what I was taught with purity culture is suppress it all. And that's the extent of any sexual education that I received until I taught myself in my 30s. And I really wanted it to be different with my kids. And I have no clue how to teach a balanced perspective. Because again, I don't want this pendulum swing to, you can do whatever the heck you want. I want them to be safe. I want them to be healthy. But purity culture is my background and I'm still working through a lot of that. So I don't know if you have any input on that from your reading.
Yeah, a couple things. So first of all, something that I've heard a lot of parents say that's been really helpful for them is as they're talking with their kids, their young kids, preteens, teens, and older, that they can tell their kids, mommy or dad. I'm going to say mommy because I'm a mommy. Mommy is having a lot of big feelings about this because of the way that I was raised. And I was raised with a lot of shame about this. So I'm going to take a few minutes and just take some deep breaths and tend to my own feelings. And then I would be happy to talk with you about this. And I think that's so important, to be transparent with our kids. Take some time for yourself, tend to your feelings, let yourself feel the shame, and then talk yourself, whatever you do to talk yourself down from that, and remind yourself, that was then, this is me now. I know a lot more now. I know that I don't need to feel that shame. Even though it happens, I know that that's not necessary. And that's just a product of my upbringing. And I can, get myself to a calm, collected place. So I'm not taking it out on my kid or accidentally throwing shame on them,
Yeah.
So I think that's been really, really helpful for a lot of parents, being open with their kids about that, speaking out loud. The other thing is teaching them right from a young age, right? So that it's not just like one big, we're all turning red in the face because we're so embarrassed about it. The talk, right? At whatever age you've decided, and whatever age that is, it's probably too late. Am I right?
Yeah.
So instead we start like right from birth. You teach them, again, developmentally appropriate information based on where they're at, and it starts with consent, and it starts with, I'm going to change your diaper now. Maybe they don't get a choice, You don't get to say yes or no. I get to say, I'm going to do it. Just so you know, here's a toy to help you be more comfortable, whatever, As they get a little bit older and they have a little more autonomy, would you like to wash yourself, or do you want me to do it? So they still get that a little bit of freedom and autonomy and that choice and that sense of like consent around my body. We're always checking in with them. If we do tickle, if we do snuggle, if we do hug or kiss our children, we still talk and we ask them, is it okay if I, do this before you do it? You don't just do it and they say, oh, hey, was that okay? That doesn't count. That's not the right way to do it. So again, we're checking in with them. As they get a little bit older, we talk to them about the different body parts. I'm sure as our little kids have been growing up together, they see there's a big difference between my son and my daughters, right? They can see their bodies look different, and we can talk about, yeah, they are different. This is, what he has, and this is what she has. And we use the correct names for our genitals. And we talk about why they're there. We can talk about what's inside their internal organs, why, just like we talk about like, this is your esophagus and this is your stomach and this is how your this system works. You also have these other organs inside for one day when you get old enough, if you want, you don't have to, you can grow a baby.
Yeah.
Things like that, So again, just like develop incrementally. One resource that's really helpful about this is called Salima Noon. I'm going to spell it. It's Saleema. Second word, Noon. So 2 different words. And it's sexual health educators. They do workshops. It can be a little bit pricey if you're just going to do it for your family. But if you have a homeschool co-op, or if you can get together with some other families and do their virtual or their online workshops, and they do a really great job of presenting information. They call it body science. And I love that, like, they're not teaching kindergartners sex ed. This is body science. And they're teaching them these developmentally appropriate information and skills for them. So that's a really helpful resource as well. Now, when it does come time for your kids that like, hey, I'm thinking about having sex, the more information that you can give them, the better choices they're going to make. Because again, they really need that autonomy. They really need that freedom. They need the ability to go out there and make that decision and use their judgment, because that's also a skill that they need to be building up from infancy on, is that judgment making skill. If you take that away and just always tell them what to do, they're not going to be able to make good judgments once they do leave the nest, right? So you've got to let them practice making those judgments. And I know I'll be eating my words when my kids are that age, and I'll say, no, you're just staying home forever and you can't come back. I'm not going to let you. I'm sure that's going to happen. But right now, it seems like the wisest idea to give them all the information and then let them make the decisions for themselves. And what we know from research is that kids who have really, really good sex ed, they know so much about body parts, right? And the mechanics of sex and different kinds of sex and what it means and consent. And they know about STIs, and they know about the risks, and they know about contraceptives, and they know about family planning and all of those things. They have sex way less than other kids who don't have that information. They also have sex at older ages than kids who don't have that information. So again, if you want your kids to be healthy and make good moral choices and be safe and take care of their partners also, and make sure that their partners are safe emotionally and physically, then giving them all this information is the absolute best way to accomplish that. And that's, again, shown by multiple studies that shows that for sure is the case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that resonates with what we've researched as well, that, Christians, what we were raised with is you suppress it, you don't talk about it.
Yeah.
But it's kind of this like cookie in the cookie jar that's on the shelf that nobody talks about. And so everybody's like, it must taste amazing, right? Like there's just temptation is the only context. It's like, it's got to be amazing. And so, what the research does show is that when people from our types of background do engage in sex, it's often unprotected. It's often, in unwise ways. It's the grabbing the cookie from the cookie jar instead of, okay, I'm an adult, or I'm a older teenager, and I'm making this decision knowing the facts. It's like, I can't resist temptation, or I'm just gonna act out, and really giving kids that information is really important and powerful, as much as, it terrifies me to think of how to do it and how to do it in the right way. I guess the thing that I'm hung up on is trying to figure out how to give the information without, at the age appropriate times, because you don't want to give so much so early that now they're infatuated by it or they're super curious, when, like you get to just be a kid for a while. You don't need to focus on this right now. So that's kind of where I'm a little bit hung up, is trying to figure out how much to tell when, for the ages. I don't know if you have some insight on that.
Yeah. So my oldest kid, when he was 7 years old, knows we discussed with him the mechanics of how sexual intercourse works. So that's age 7. And it hasn't had any negative effects. He doesn't seem to be obsessed about it or overly curious about like trying to see it happen or anything, or like access things online, He's not really doing that. He also was very curious about like what breasts look like, because he sees their general shape underneath clothes, but he doesn't have any. Daddy doesn't have any. Mommy has some. So I see him like trying to catch a peek of me sometimes when I'm like getting out of the shower or something. And I have to remind him like, well, that's my privacy, and we have rules about privacy. But I can show you some like textbook illustrations of like what breasts look like. And that was enough to satisfy his curiosity. Now he's not like going on the computer to try to look it up himself. We don't want that. And he's not obsessing about it, because he's had his curiosity sated about it.
Yeah.
So I think if you're worried about opening the door to make them curious about something you don't exactly want them to be curious about right now, I'm gonna say they probably already are. They're probably already curious. And if you haven't opened the door of that conversation, then you haven't given them permission to talk with you about it yet. So they're already thinking about these things. It's your job to open that door and say, hey, let's talk about it. Here's a time to ask me questions. Like, we're going on this car ride, right? Like, we're going here, you're kind of stuck, you're a captive audience. And now is the time that you get to ask me about the, X, Y, or Z. And I can explain anything you want. no judgment, no criticism, no question is a stupid question, things like that. And that can be really helpful to give them that permission, give them the language to talk about it. One of the worst possible things that could happen is if a kid is assaulted or harassed or touched or, something that made them feel unsafe, but they don't have the language to talk with you about it because you haven't opened that up with them yet. So they don't know the words to say, like the cookie jar, right? It's something we never, ever, ever talk about. We don't even call it a cookie jar. We don't even call it a cookie, and so they sneak or something happens and now they can't even tell you about it. So now your kid is suffering and you don't even know. And that would just be like the worst case scenario. So so my advice would be go ahead and open up the door and ask them what they're curious about and help them say that curiosity in healthy ways. Teach them these are the healthy, safe ways of having your curious questions answered. That's what I would say about that.
I was thinking about how, sometimes we watch movies or there's these cartoons that are made, Shrek or whatever, that has jokes in all the different ages. And you still watch it with them. And we get stuff that they would never get. And just because they're hearing it doesn't mean that they're affected by it. It's just like, it goes over their head. So I feel like if we talk to them about it too young, but we're doing it with no shame and they can ask any questions they want. And there isn't that taboo aspect to it like you had growing up on it, then maybe it's not opening the door too quickly to ruin their childhood, but it's actually just like, oh, okay, well, it's no big deal. And because I think it comes down to the shame factor. Like if it's talked about with shame, it's very different than if you talk about it young, but it's not taboo.
I think it can help if you have animals around. Like, I think it's easier to see, well, here are these animals reproduce, my kids were at school this past year and the teacher had some turtles and there's a male and female turtle. And it happened to be at a time when the two turtles were mating. And she's like, sorry, parents, you might have some uncomfortable conversations when your kids come home because this is what they saw at school. And luckily, my kids were already prepped and they, just thought, oh, that was kind of funny. Yeah, haha. And we talked about it some more, just tried to feel how they were feeling about it. And they were fine. Like there was no shame. They didn't feel awkward. It didn't make them feel really embarrassed or red in the face. It was just like, oh, this is just a fact of life. And so that was really, really awesome.
We brought them to the lake last spring and they found some crayfish that were mating and they're just like, oh, look, they're mating.
Perfect.
Josiah and I are in the background, like all blushed, because it's so uncomfortable to us, but we're trying not to show how comfortable it is to us. And to them, it's just like, oh, okay.
I did really appreciate how you started as kind of a theme through it of trying to deal with your own stuff and keeping the shame out of it. I think we might be doing a better job than we think as far as communicating the facts and keeping the shame out of it, because I think they do have a fairly, it's just sex. It's just how it is. I feel extremely awkward about the conversation, but I'm not sure that completely translates. I don't think it does.
We were using Kindle and I was reading a book on sex because I'm trying to teach myself. I'm trying to take away the shame of it on my own self. And so my kids wanted to read a book on Kindle. And I was like, well, just like, don't go on that book, and they're like, my then 9-year-old was like, well, why would you be reading about sex? Like, you've done it, like, he's counting how many kids in the family. But like, to him, it was no shame to it. It was no big deal. It's like, oh, that's so cute. And I'm like, oh, this is actually like, it cracks me up, but it's also like really encouraging to hear him be like, why? Like no big deal,
It's so awesome. Isn't that such so mind-blowing to see the difference? Comparing our childhood with theirs when they make different comments like that is just like, oh my gosh. I kind of envy you, kids. Right. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
So I think holding on to comments that they make like that is very good for us because it it reaffirms, okay, we are doing okay. They're not having any shame about this. Because we second guess ourselves a lot on how to do it, how we're doing as parent, but just noticing those comments and things like that can be very helpful. So I think it's something to keep in mind for parents out there.
Yes. Yeah. Well, good for you. That must feel so good too, right? Because I know I'm in the same place where I have all this shame inside, and I have to get over myself, you know, in order to teach my kids these healthier things and not give them hinder their growth because of my hangups, right?
Exactly.
So it's so hard, but it's so worthwhile then to see my kids be able to talk about it without turning red in the face and without feeling like, oh, I'm talking about that thing we're not supposed to be talking about,
exactly.
you know, that I feel like inside. So good for you guys. It's awesome. Yay, parenting wins. Love it. Yay.
Yes.
I know we're kind of coming up on a little over an hour now, but I wanted to see if there's any other questions that you guys wanted to cover before we wrap this up.
Well, I'm not sure how we can fit it into like 5 or 10 minutes, but just discussing with kids a transition in their faith is something that, you know, is a conversation that's coming for sure. Churches haven't been open due to COVID. But, you know, the oldest especially, I've told him explicitly, you know, the reason we're on missions, the reason we're missionaries, because people are going to hell, you know, and we need to tell them about Jesus. And now his mom doesn't believe in, you know, in the Christian message anymore.
When I kind of mentioned something about that several months ago, like he just started crying.
Oh yeah.
And so we're like, how do we, I know they've overheard us talk together with friends this past year, so they probably know more than we think, but it is a question that we had for you, because you've also done this faith transition. Like, how do we talk to them without rocking their world too much? Because I know for me, deconverting, I felt my entire life foundation crumble, and it was rough. And I don't want that for my kids if I can help it. But I want to open their minds up to life outside the church.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do have some thoughts. So like I said, my kids are younger, so I'm not going to be able to speak from my own experience, but just what I've gathered from other parents and in all the parenting Facebook groups that I'm part of, ex-Mormon ones, ex-fundamentalist ones, and what I've seen that's been really helpful. And two things. The first one is the more important one. And this is just like in any conversation where it's going to be kind of heavy, it might be kind of emotionally laden, is always to make sure you're looking out for the other person's feeling of safety, right? In this case, it's not necessarily, or maybe their physical safety, but especially their mental and emotional and now spiritual safety. So always have that in the forefront of your mind. Whatever you're going to say to them, always make sure that you're trying to help them feel spiritually safe with you and with whatever information you're giving them. And that's going to be I think the hardest part, is figuring out how to present this information in a way that's going to help them feel safe. But if you can manage that, if you can help them feel safe, they will be so much more willing to listen to what you're saying. If you come at this and you make them feel unsafe right off the bat, the protective mechanisms in their brain are going to go right up, and there's going to be this concrete wall, and nothing that you say at them is going to be able to get in. And then they're going to feel like maybe they can't even talk to you about this thing anymore. So that would be the danger. That's going to be like a little bit walking on eggshells, kind of just being really careful, thinking about what must it be like to be in their shoes, and what do they need to hear to help them feel safe. Like, I have their best interest in mind, and I have their best spiritual interest in mind. So I'm going to say that's number one. And that is absolutely so huge, that keeping their safety in mind. The next thing is, I'm going to say the thing that I found is like the root catalyst of almost all faith deconstructions from all the people that I've talked with or read accounts from, is they found out that they were deceived by someone, right? So maybe for me as Mormon, I believed in angels, right? If you believe the Bible, you believe in a talking donkey, right? And Balaam's donkey. We believe in lots of crazy things. So it's not like, hey, guess what? Like, that was crazy, right? That's not going to make anyone understand your deconstruction. Because it's okay to believe in things that now I think seem a little bit wild and far out there. And if people are still holding on to those beliefs, again, like, that's fine. We get to believe in whatever things that to other people might seem crazy, Noah's Ark, whatever. But what I would want to explain to him is not that, like, wow, well, these things are really crazy, so we don't believe in them more because they were crazy. Instead, it's, we don't believe anymore because we found out through this evidence that we were being lied to, right? Like, I know Joseph Smith lied about practicing polygamy, right? And he coerced women into these marriages by lying to them about their spiritual well-being. He lied to their husbands. I also know that the top leaders of the Mormon church lied about particular things. And that's really what broke my shelf. That's really what got me started down the deconstruction path. So if you can try to think of, like, what was your catalyst? What was the thing that really made you start thinking, wait a second, where you never thought about that before? You had lots of opportunities to think that before, but you never did until this certain circumstance or set of circumstances happened. What was that for you? And you can explain that to your kid too. And my hope is that when you get to explain, this is the deception that I found out about. And once I realized that deception had happened or that deception was there, then I started wondering, like, what else? What else was not people were not being completely transparent with me about. And then hopefully once your kid is feeling safe and you're showing so much empathy to them, and then you explain the content, right? So you set up the setting and then you give the content of what you want to tell them about these things that, maybe you felt lied to or you felt people were being dishonest about. And then hopefully they'll be able to kind of be on the same page. They may not be, and that's kind of the risk here. They may decide, well, I still really want to keep going to church, or I do believe differently than you. They get to have that autonomy. They get to have that freedom of, well, I still believe in this, and I still have this perspective and I want to keep going to church. So those are my two main points. The last thing is obviously, like, community. I know for so many of us, community is huge. If they've got their best friends at church and they have their identity built up with, like, this is who I am. I am an evangelical youth and I am a leader in my youth group and people look up to me and I have all these friends here. Like, I can't leave that. That's totally understandable. Yeah. And so your job is, again, make them feel safe and empathized with. And you can let them know, like, I know how that must feel for you. And you get to decide, what you're going to do with this information and where you're going to go from there. So that's my 2 cents is those couple of things. But first and foremost, always safety.
I love that. I love that you emphasize that safety. And that's going to look different for each family and even each kid, because they don't have the same safety needs. Some of them need a lot more reassurance of that safety than others. So I love that. And just like there isn't an answer book that tells us how to do everything, that's kind of one of these subjects here that doesn't have a black and white answer. So you kind of have to, it's very helpful to be reminded of that safety thing. I had not thought about it from that perspective. So I'll definitely keep that in mind. And then to think through just how it looks for yourself, for your kid, and also not to just postpone it like we've been doing because we don't know what to do. So just start and trust yourself and that your child and can just do the best you can. We don't have to be perfect. We're not perfect, and that's okay. Nobody is perfect, but we do the best we can and continue to have an ongoing open conversation about it.
Yeah, and that I just appreciate you kind of, it's just showing me like it's time to start the discussion, and this is kind of the ways that we can phrase and begin a conversation. I think the first thing that changed for me, and it was changing at the same time that she deconverted, is I don't believe in hell anymore. And I actually had a very fragile view of, like, I was kind of only barely holding on to that view anyways for a long time for theological reasons, because it's a theologically problematic doctrine already.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Especially the conscious eternal torment. It makes no sense along a lot of different for a lot of different reasons. It doesn't really make sense, and there's only a few scriptures that are kind of mashed together from all different parts of the Bible. It doesn't make a lot of sense. So it is something I want to just sit down and say, I think I taught you wrong on this specific thing, because I don't think that's what the Bible actually says, no matter what perspective you're coming from. And that for me gave me peace to say, I don't think you're going to hell because of this, and then from there, I think the reason we're able to have this podcast together is because I'm very focused on Jesus, and Jesus has a lot to say that's very similar to what a humanist would say, about, anti-religion and focusing on the vulnerable of society instead of just propping up religious institutions, and focused on, it's not just membership in our religious group that's run by men that gets you into heaven. It's actually being a decent fucking human being, to paraphrase. So
I think those were his exact words. I'm sure I read that in the Gospel of John.
So there might be a way to kind of reorient them towards that, to, like, mom thinks about these things differently, but she's really focused on the same sorts of things. She wants to be a kind, decent human being like Jesus wants us to be. Yeah. So what do you think that God sees about that, if you believe in God? There might be a way, instead of just saying she's an unbeliever.
And your point did make me think about that. Like, what was the tipping point? I mean, there's quite a few different things, but really it was how the church teaches forgiveness, like forgive and forget, basically. And our experience at the time was basically being told to forgive and forget the abuse that had happened. And I was not willing to put up with that. And that was the end. So even to be able to present that, like, no, I think I was lied about how we're supposed to handle abuse. And this is how the church does it. And that's why I can't subscribe to it anymore. Anyway, good food for thought. Thank you. I've really, really appreciated this podcast. We are going to go do our homework now. But thank you.
One quick thing, what Josiah said, when you said in this hypothetical conversation with your kid, what do you think God would want? What do you think he would feel about this? That is so huge and so important, because you're showing your kid that their opinion matters and their judgment matters. And that's going to help them continue to work on their judgment making skills. And that their opinion and that what they have to say is safe with you, right? That you're not going to listen to what they have to say and then break it down and tell them why they're just wrong, right?
Yeah.
But that you're going to listen and appreciate and empathize with what they say. Again, making them feel safe with you. They're so safe to come and talk with you about anything and everything. And that's huge. So that'll really, really help with your relationship with your kid. Definitely.
This has been great. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on our podcast and share some of your wisdom with us.
My pleasure. This is so nice to talk with you too. And thank you so much for having me on. This has been such a delight.
So again, for our listeners, you can find Rachel on Post-Mormon Parenting, TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. Great content. Thank you so much, Rachel. I hope you have a good day.
Thank you so much. You too. Take care, guys.
Bye.
Bye.